The sharpest pain that week didn't come from my knee. It came from my daughter's mouth. I had managed to pull myself upright, clinging to the edge of the nightstand. Sweat dripping down my back as the incision throbbed. My voice was barely above a whisper when I called out for her. Melissa appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, impatience written across her face. "You're still not dressed. Why aren't you like my mother-in-law?" she snapped, as if comparing me to Eleanor would somehow make me rise and walk without help. Her words landed harder than the floor beneath my unsteady legs. I had spent 40 years at Boston Memorial, coaxing strangers through illness and pain with patience. I thought I had passed down to my own child, but in that moment, standing in my daughter's house on Beacon Street, I realized that patience had not been inherited. Melissa adjusted her gold watch, one I had given her last Christmas, before turning away. Eleanor wouldn't complain. She handles herself. I bit back the urge to remind her that Eleanor had never endured 12-hour shifts or postponed surgery to pay her son's tuition. I steadied my breath, lowered myself back to the bed, and swallowed the familiar sting of apology. Derek entered then, dressed in his tailored suit, his expression cool. "We have a board dinner tonight. Try not to need anything until we get back." I nodded, silent. The room smelled faintly of Melissa's perfume, sharp and expensive, but it only made me ache for the warm, antiseptic scent of the hospital halls where I once mattered. As the door closed behind them, I stared at the phone on the nightstand, my fingers trembling. One decision had been delayed too long. It was time to make the first call. The phone was still within reach, but before I could dial, memories crowded in, uninvited yet insistent. Boston had always been the backdrop of my sacrifices. I could still picture the long walk from the Red Line station to Boston Memorial, the winter wind cutting through my thin coat because I hadn't replaced it in years. Every extra dollar went into the savings account I guarded like a lifeline. That account later became Melissa's tuition at Harvard Medical. I told myself the blisters on my feet, the exhaustion etched in my bones, were worth it. My daughter would walk halls I could never dream of. I remembered crossing the Charles River Bridge at sunrise, looking down at the rowers slicing through the water. I used to imagine walking those paths with Melissa, hand in hand, but instead I hurried toward another 12-hour shift. Birthdays and Christmas mornings blurred into hospital alarms and patient charts. My colleagues teased me for living at the hospital, but I believed love was measured in what you gave up. When Melissa married Derek, I emptied a certificate of deposit to help with the down payment on their Beacon Street house. I smiled through the ceremony, telling myself the limestone facade and tall windows would give her the stability I never had. That home, that carefully chosen address, was supposed to be my gift of permanence. Now, sitting in that very house as an unwanted guest, I realized permanence had been an illusion. They had taken the keys, the tuition, the safety net, and somehow managed to see me as less than the mother-in-law who never gave them a cent. My hands stilled over the phone. The sacrifices carved into Boston's streets had not been erased, but maybe it was time I stopped paying their toll. With that thought, I pressed the first number. My fingers shook as I dialed the bank. For years, I had watched Melissa and Derek's names linked to mine on statements, justifying every withdrawal as temporary, every overdraft as a misunderstanding. When the manager's voice came on the line, familiar after 3 decades, I steadied myself. "This is Clara Winslow. I need all joint accounts with Melissa and Derek Harrington frozen immediately. Remove their access to my personal accounts." There was a pause, a cautious clearing of the throat. "Mrs. Winslow, are you certain?" I pressed my palm against my bandaged knee, feeling the ache radiate. "Absolutely certain. And I want a full accounting of every transfer in the past 5 years." The silence that followed was heavier than the cast on my leg. When he finally agreed, my chest loosened, though guilt crept in quick. Melissa's face, young and proud on her white coat ceremony day, flickered before me. I had believed then that money could stitch us closer together. Now, I was cutting those stitches myself. The second call was harder. James Harrington, my lawyer for 20 years, answered with concern. "Clara, shouldn't you be resting? I need eviction papers drawn up. 24 hours notice. Deliver them tomorrow morning." Even through the phone, I heard his hesitation. "That's harsh. Clara, are you sure I thought of Melissa's words? Why aren't you like my Emil and of Derek's cold glance, as if I were an obligation rather than a mother?" My voice, though tight, did not waver. "I am sure. They've had enough of my money and my silence. James promised he would prepare everything." After I hung up, I let the phone rest on the nightstand, my hand trembling not from weakness, but from the weight of choice. For the first time in years, I wasn't enabling, I was protecting. Outside the window, Beacon Street traffic hummed, life continuing as if nothing had shifted. But I knew something had. By tomorrow, this house would no longer be theirs, and I would no longer be theirs either. Vivian arrived the next morning, her knock brisk and familiar. She had been my colleague at Boston Memorial for decades, a woman who could read pain before a patient ever spoke. One look at me in that upstairs bedroom, pale and hunched over my walker, and her mouth tightened. "You're coming with me," she said. I started to protest, but she held up her hand. "No arguments. You can't recover in a place that drains you." She packed my small bag herself, ignoring my murmured apologies. By the time Derek and Melissa returned late that night, I was gone. Cambridge greeted me with quiet streets and the sight of Vivian's red brick condo. Neat and modest, she settled me at her kitchen table, a mug of chamomile tea warming my hands. The scent of lemon and honey wrapped around me like the comfort I hadn't known in weeks. "Drink," she instructed. "You need rest, not guilt." I watched her move easily about her kitchen, humming as she sliced fruit, the same way she had years ago when we were both pulling double shifts and sneaking bites between patients. She didn't ask for explanations. She didn't demand gratitude. She simply made space for me. It was startling, the contrast. In Melissa's house, every request felt like a debt added to a ledger. Here, care flowed freely, unmeasured. My eyes burned, and Vivian reached across the table, her hand warm over mine. "You gave your daughter everything," she said softly. "But sometimes everything isn't what people need. Sometimes it's just an excuse for them not to grow." Her words sank deeper than the tea. I realized then that generosity without boundaries had been my undoing. Vivian didn't scold, didn't pity. She only reminded me of truths I had long silenced. Later, when she guided me to her guest room, the sheets crisp and clean, she teased lightly. "Don't worry, I won't compare you to anyone's mother-in-law." I laughed. The sound surprising even to me. For the first time since surgery, I felt safe enough to let exhaustion pull me under. But safety was temporary. By morning, retaliation had already begun. It didn't take long for Melissa to strike back. By the second morning in Vivian's condo, a knock rattled the door. When Vivian peered through the peephole, she turned to me with a look that mixed anger and disbelief. "Your daughter's here," she whispered. "And she's brought paramedics." I steadied myself with my walker, heart pounding as Vivian cracked the door but left the chain in place. Melissa's voice carried in, sharp and commanding. "My mother's confused and refusing care. We need to take her for evaluation." Vivian's reply was calm steel. "She's not confused. She's resting." and she doesn't consent to be transported. I made my way forward, each step deliberate. When the paramedics finally saw me, hair brushed, dressed in clean clothes, standing upright, their posture shifted. One asked, gently, "Ma'am, can you tell us your name and today's date?" "My name is Clara Winslow. It's Wednesday, June 10th. And I had a total knee replacement last week. My mind, however, is perfectly intact." The younger medic nodded slowly, discomfort flickering in his eyes. Melissa's face flushed. She's on heavy medication. She doesn't know what she's saying. Before I could respond, another voice came down the hall. "That will be enough." James Harrington, my attorney, had arrived, folder in hand. "Mrs. Winslow was evaluated this morning by an independent psychiatrist. I have documentation here of her full competency." The paramedics looked relieved. Melissa's lips tightened. But Derek appeared behind her, suit wrinkled and temper rising. "You think freezing our accounts and evicting us makes you some kind of hero?" His eyes landed on me, burning. "All you've ever done is throw money around, make Melissa feel like she could never stand on her own. You turned me into a shadow in my own marriage." For a moment, the sting of his words cut deeper than Melissa's comparisons. But then I saw what lay beneath them. Resentment built on years of dependence. My silence had enabled it. My generosity had fed it. And now my refusal to yield exposed it. The paramedics excused themselves, clearly unwilling to be part of the spectacle. Vivian closed the door firmly, her shoulders relaxing only once the hallway fell quiet. I sank into the chair by her kitchen table, breathing slowly. The battle had shifted, but it was far from over. By nightfall, I knew I would need to arm myself with more than resolve. That afternoon, James spread a neat stack of documents across Vivian's dining table. The sight of so many forms might have once overwhelmed me, but now it steadied me. These pages were shields, each signature another stitch, closing the wounds I had allowed to bleed for too long. "We'll start with revocation of power of attorney," James explained. "Melissa currently holds it. If she contested your competency in court, this would give her leverage. Do you want to rescind immediately?" "Yes," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. My hand shook slightly as I signed. But once the ink dried, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Next came the healthcare proxy. Melissa had been listed since Thomas died. The irony of trusting her with my medical future after what she had done this week nearly made me laugh. "Replace her," I said. I looked at Vivian, who stiffened in surprise. "Would you accept?" Her eyes softened. "Of course, I'd be honored." James nodded and slid the paper toward me. Another signature, another boundary. Finally, the will. This one sat heavier, but I forced myself to read each clause. Melissa and Derek were stripped of primary beneficiary status. Instead, I directed funds to Boston Memorial's nursing scholarship program, a way to honor the young aides I had mentored over the years. A trust would be established for Tyler, carefully guarded so his parents could never touch it, and for my mother's pearls, which I had always assumed would go to Melissa. I wrote in Caroline Jenkins's daughter, now studying nursing. "Are you certain about this?" James asked gently. "I am," I replied, though grief rose sharp in my throat. It wasn't the loss of money that hurt. It was the loss of the future I had once imagined, the picture of my daughter treasuring what I left behind. When the last page was signed, James gathered the documents with quiet efficiency. "You've done the hard part," he said. I sat back, drained but oddly lighter. These papers were more than legal protections. They were proof that I was no longer for sale, and by the end of the week, I would be reminded why those protections mattered. I hadn't expected to see Eleanor Harrington so soon. She called one evening, her tone clipped but not unkind. "Clara, I think we should talk." There's been enough noise around all of this. We met at a small cafe near Harvard Square, a place I hadn't visited since Melissa was a student. Eleanor arrived in a crisp navy suit, her posture as upright as her reputation. She ordered black coffee. No sugar. No hesitation. I imagine Melissa has painted me in flattering colors. She began, but let me be clear, I never gave them a cent. Her words startled me. Not even for their house. She shook her head firmly. They asked. I refused. Derek grew up knowing that my money was mine. I told him if he wanted a certain lifestyle, he needed to earn it. That's why they turned to you. The sting of realization spread through me. While I had been emptying accounts and selling time from my own body to make Melissa's path smoother, Eleanor had been building respect by withholding. I thought I was showing love, I admitted, my voice thin. Perhaps you were, she said, softening slightly. But love without limits can turn into something else. Obligation. Resentment. You didn't mean harm, Clara, but you created dependency. And dependency rarely breeds respect. I stared down at my untouched tea. For years, I had believed generosity would hold my family together. Yet here sat the woman Melissa held as the gold standard, who had given nothing material but boundaries that commanded esteem. Eleanor's gaze softened further. You are not a weak woman, but Melissa perceives you as one because you gave too much. It's not too late to change that. As I left the cafe, the June air was heavy with the scent of lilacs. For the first time, I understood that the comparison Melissa hurled at me had never been about who gave more. It was about who refused to be taken from. By the time I reached Vivian's car, I knew the next confrontation with my daughter could not be delayed. Melissa agreed to meet me at my apartment, a neutral ground away from Vivian's steady presence and Derek's interruptions. She arrived with her jaw tight, her coat draped over one arm as though she had somewhere more important to be. We sat across from each other, the silence between us heavier than any cast. Finally, she spoke. Do you know how it felt, growing up in your shadow? Everyone at Boston Memorial adored you. Patients, nurses, even doctors. And then at home, every bill paid, every problem solved by you. I could never breathe without feeling like I owed you something. Her words cut deep, though they carried a strange clarity. I thought I was helping, I said quietly. It was the only way I knew to show love. My own mother had nothing to give. I promised myself my daughter would never go without. Melissa's eyes flashed. But every check, every down payment, every gift had strings. You think I don't remember the looks? The way you'd remind me who made medical school possible? Who bought the house? It wasn't love, Mom. It was control dressed up as generosity. I let the accusation hang in the air. Part of me wanted to protest, to explain that reminding her had come from exhaustion, not malice, but another part knew she wasn't entirely wrong. I wanted you to be secure, I whispered. I didn't realize security can feel like a cage. Her shoulders sagged slightly, though her eyes stayed sharp. You've taken it all back now. The accounts, the house, even the will. Maybe that's fair. Maybe you needed to finally prove you could stop us. But don't pretend it's about love anymore. It's about power. I folded my hands in my lap. The silence between us raw and honest. We hadn't reconciled. But for the first time, nothing was hidden. When she left, the door clicked shut with a finality that told me the next chapter of this battle would not be fought with words alone. Golden Pines became my sanctuary. The rehab center's halls were lined with faces I once knew as colleagues, now smiling at me not with pity, but with respect. Each morning, I pushed through therapy, sweat dripping as I bent and straightened my knee. Pain was no longer something to endure for others. It was something to conquer for myself. When I was discharged, I surprised even Vivian by applying for a part-time position at Boston Memorial. The patient advocacy department welcomed me as though I had never left. Sitting across from patients and their families, guiding them through paperwork and procedures, I felt a quiet renewal. My worth was not measured by what I gave away, but by the clarity I could offer. At night, I drafted letters to the first nursing students who would receive scholarships from the fund I had established. In each, I reminded them that resilience and compassion mattered more than prestige. For Tyler's trust, I set rules that required work and accountability grades to be maintained, hours of community service logged. Opportunity would be his, but entitlement would not. One evening, sorting through a box of papers I had avoided since Thomas died, I found his journal. Between pages of neat handwriting, one line seemed written for this very moment. "You can't buy respect, only earn it." I traced the words with my finger, tears slipping down my cheek. For years I had tried to purchase love, mistaking it for respect. Now, belatedly, I was beginning to live by the truth he had known all along. I closed the journal, feeling a weight lift. Tomorrow, I would walk into my own apartment again, not as someone diminished, but as someone ready to stand on her own terms. The day I left Golden Pines, the sun slanted across Back Bay in a way that made the brick facades glow. Vivian insisted on carrying my bag, but I refused. With only a cane for balance, I walked up the steps to my apartment unaided. Each step was slow, deliberate, but it was mine. Inside, the air carried the familiar scent of wood polish and lavender sachets I had tucked into drawers months earlier. Home had never felt so much like a victory. As I lowered myself onto the sofa, Tyler appeared from the hallway, a duffel bag at his feet. "Grandma," he said, almost shy, "do you mind if I stay here this summer? I need space." Away from them. I studied his face, the hesitation, the longing, and nodded. "Of course, you'll always have a place with me." Relief washed across his features. And in that moment, I understood that a different legacy had already begun. That evening, as we unpacked groceries together, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Melissa: "Coffee. Sometime." The words were cautious, stripped of accusation. Not an apology, not forgiveness, but something that left room for breath. I stared at the screen, then set it aside. For the first time, I felt no urgency to respond. The rhythm of pots clinking in the sink, Tyler humming under his breath, the quiet satisfaction of standing in my own kitchen, all of it spoke louder than her message. I had walked back into my apartment on my own two legs, and I would live here on my own terms. Tomorrow would bring choices, but tonight, peace was enough.